Okay, thanks again, everyone, for being here. And just as a preliminary, I would like to say that this set of thoughts that I'm presenting is really one of the implications of my writing on geopolitical economy and so on, because one of the big implications is that we are now living in an increasingly multipolar world. The title of my talk is, of course, the geopolitical economy of multipolarity, the historical significance of the BRICS, but I also have an alternative title, which is BRICS without mortar, ? And I will leave Olga to translate that metaphor for you. Until recently, those who sought to gauge how far the BRICS were really displacing the West's and the US centrality in world affairs compared growth rates. They would celebrate every time one of the BRICS growth rates went down, and they say, look, this is not going to keep up, and so the BRICS are not going to really displace the West. But even though BRICS growth rates have gone up and down, they have remained consistently quite significantly above that of Western countries. So today, those who would like to dismiss the BRICS because they have this problem, they are now posing a significantly different question. They ask how coherent is the BRICS group as a unit? Does anything really bind them together? And there may be 4 and perhaps 5 with the addition of South Africa BRICS, but to coin a metaphor, where is the mortar? For the New York Times, for example, the BRICS don't have enough in common, enough shared goals to function effectively as a counterweight to the West. They are deeply divided on some basic issues and rivals rather than allies in the global economy, and have achieved little as a group. Worse, they have widely divergent economies, invest little in each other, and have disparate foreign policy aims and different forms of government. Such a motley crew could declare a BRICS development bank feasible and viable, but the devil would be in the yet to agree upon details. My view is that this is not an unreasonable point to make, so I think it deserves an answer, and I've decided to answer it by focusing on India. The reason why I chose India is because I think that it represents perhaps the most problematic of the 4 BRICS states, but the broader arguments apply more generally. It is more ambiguously situated in relation to the United States than are Russia or China. It has long-standing border disputes with China and has, over the last decade and a half, moved closer to the United States economically as well as militarily. India's pro-US tilt was consummated as recently as March 2005 in a US commitment to make India a great power, and in the historic 2006 Hyde Act, under which the US and India stepped up cooperation in civilian nuclear technology, despite India's continuing refusal to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And if all this were not enough, the United States' recent pivot to Asia has catapulted India into the center of the US's anti-China strategy in the region. India is a member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a US-led trade organization that pointedly excludes China. How damaging might this situation be to the prospects of a BRIC bank and for the BRICS as a coherent international grouping? The new Indian chief economist of the World Bank recently played down prospects of a BRICS bank and expressed the hope that the World Bank would up its game and obviate the need for a BRICS bank entirely. Established Indian foreign policy experts remain wary of the possibility of China using a BRICS bank to expand the renminbi's international role, and resentful of China's unwillingness to support India's bid for a seat in the United Nations Security Council. Can the BRICS transcend such tensions? A little historical perspective might provide an answer.
Достаточно посмотреть на эту проблему с исторической перспективы.
It will show these differences to be chiefly the result of the different distances the various BRICS have traveled from the old export-oriented neoliberal economic policies. It is the recent narrowing of these differences that has provided BRICS their mortar, and they can be expected to continue narrowing for a good while yet. Neoliberal export-oriented policies imposed by the World Bank and the IMF on most developing countries through structural adjustment programs since the 1980s kept most of the developing world in a low productivity trap with stagnant economies and sometimes declining national incomes. Some countries, however, were successfully able to defy their injunctions and upgrade their productive capacity so as to be able to export higher value goods. They became the fast growing BRICS. Even for them, however, this growth path meant a low wage policy at home, since the domestic market was not the main driver of growth, and a tilt toward the US as the world's main demand locomotive, its buyer of last resort. As in crisis, it has now become extremely clear that the main demand drivers has to be domestic demand. This development contains the hopeful possibility that expanding domestic demand through higher productivity and higher wages will reduce inequality and poverty. It also obviates any need for a tilt in international policy towards the United States for its markets, and practically mandates opposition to forms of international governance such as the IMF's neoliberal conditionalities that obstruct these growth strategies. The various BRICS are just at very different points in this journey from neoliberalism. At one extreme, China never embraced it fully. Its economic reforms were directed by the Communist Party, which has, so far at least, remained well shy of a full capitalist transition. And the Chinese government initially inclined towards expanding investment demand after the crisis broke, and now as investment demand is being exhausted, it is expanding consumer demand at home. Russia, though it remains far from an economy in which growth is driven by an expanding domestic market, remembers the horrors of shock therapy. And in Brazil, under the Lula and Rousseff government, they have made a decisive, historic turn away from increasing inequality in Brazil to decreasing it. India is the laggard in this respect. Both neoliberalism and a pro-US tilt in foreign policy remain popular among the country's politically influential middle classes. However, pressures against both are building up. Domestically, democratic imperatives of legitimacy in a country which still contributes the world's largest pool of poor people have required a systematic dilution of neoliberalism. The crisis has also cooled Indo-US relations with the Obama administration, appearing to restore favor to Pakistan, delaying the implementation of the Indo-US nuclear deal, while being no more willing to support India's Security Council ambitions than China was. Above all, however, the United States remains mired in recession, no longer a source of export growth, while China continues growth at impressive rates. So not surprisingly, India has balanced its membership of the Trans-Pacific Partnership with membership of the China-led Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and continues to seek closer ties with China. While policymakers in all BRICS countries have made their blunders, there is no reason to expect them to display extraordinary obduracy. So that is why what we see today is that at the end of the last BRICS summit, there was a declaration which announced made some very, very important announcements. This is in line with their call for the reform of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And these efforts have met with consistent Western resistance. So now they have decided to act and build their own institutions. So it looks as though the BRICS Development Bank, which was originally discussed in Delhi, has far advanced in Durban. The BRICS also announced a contingent reserve agreement to pool reserves and a few other such initiatives. The BRICS common agenda of pushing international economic governance away from neoliberalism and Western dominance was also manifest when they complained that Western austerity was holding back world growth. Given the recent US and Western attacks on the work of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD, for being critical of Western financial institutions, they made a particular point for calling for a strengthening of UNCTAD's capacity to deliver on its programs of concrete, of consensus building, policy dialogue, research, technical cooperation and capacity building. The Durban Declaration also included statements on Syria, Mali, Palestine, Iran, etc. And for the first time, China and India reiterated the importance they attach to the status of Brazil, India and South Africa in international affairs and supported their aspirations to play a greater role at the UN. This was a coded reference to the Security Council aspirations. Not since the days of the non-aligned movement and its demand for a new international economic order in the 1970s has the world seen such a coordinated challenge to Western supremacy in the world economy and in world economic governance. Thank you.